Today, for Tales of Hometown History, we're going to tell a story about our 26th president, Theodore Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt was part of this Roosevelt dynasty family that really was extraordinary. You know, from himself, even his father, the role he had played in politics, to then Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt. They all played a crucial part in our nation's history. They also, much like I've talked about the Coleman family, and you could say the Kennedy family as well, had tremendous triumphs, but they also had these terrible tragedies that seemed to follow them. One of the heartbreaking things with Teddy Roosevelt is he always struggled with what I think you could say today is probably depression. His brother Elliot was especially bad. He struggled with drinking, probably had suffered with bipolarism. He was the father of Eleanor Roosevelt, and he eventually basically drank himself to death. And it was one of those things from that the Roosevelts dealt with that you sort of silently dealt with it. But as bad as it was losing his brother, his father passing away, his father was his hero. And part of the reason, part of Teddy's makeup was his father had the option to pay somebody else to go in his place in the Civil War. And to Teddy's dismay, he learned that his father had done so. Partially, Teddy's father had done it for a number of different reasons, but he was an honorable and extraordinary man. But it was something that always bothered Teddy thereafter. And that was part of the reason he sort of had that bravado. But I think it was also so much of it was to combat the desperation, the melancholy that would take him over. And he found his resolve in beating that out in nature and being gregarious with, you know, seek action, seek action. His daughter Alice had actually said that he was basically sought to be the corpse at every funeral, the wife or the bride at every wedding, and the child or the baby at every christening. And it was just sort of like he was very boisterous. He very much took up weirdly, and it's sort of with him, it's odd, but he's always talked about speak softly and carry a big stick, but he never really spoke softly. He was just a very intriguing man and really changed the presidency. But one particular tragedy that sticks with me that Ken Burns, who I've always talked about, has been, I love his documentaries. And he does a series on the Roosevelts, on these very things of the tremendous triumph and the terrible tragedy that seemed to follow them. But he talks about in particular one day that just absolutely devastated Teddy and really changed, probably in certain ways, the trajectory of his life. Teddy was very much about, because he was a weak child, and he suffered with asthma and a couple other things. He would ultimately go out west and completely rebuild his body, and he was always about action, take action, take action. He was a brilliant man. He would read at least one book a day. He was one of those people that sort of woke up standing up. And he would keep a journal to sort of, I think in part, to gather his thoughts, and he could look back on what was I thinking at this certain time. That's very important to this story. February 14th, 1884 was a day that would stick in Teddy Roosevelt's life forever. This was the day his mother, Martha Bullock Roosevelt, had died of typhoid fever. And it was a real sudden, just she had been sick, but it was just not foreseen. And he talked about how sweet and amazing and extraordinary, a real Southern belle that his mother was, and how important she was to him. And 2 days earlier, his first child had been born, uh, who they called Alice, and his wife, Alice Roosevelt, later that day would wind out. She had been sick, and he had been at assembly for the New York Congress and thought that she was going to be okay. And unfortunately, the pregnancy had masked a kidney disease, and she wound up slipping into a coma and would wind out dying later that day. And this was just one of those tragic events. It's certainly the most tragic of his life. As I had said, this journal would that he kept would come back into the story. On that particular day, all Teddy wrote was an X. He simply wrote, "The light has gone out of my life." Sadly, he just didn't know what to do, and he would wind out giving his daughter Alice, who's newly born, over to his sister. I believe her name was Mammy, is what they used to all call her, and she would wind out raising Alice. And Teddy, primarily in a lot of ways, didn't have a ton to do with her. I guess it was too painful for him, but it also would wind out creating a lot of problems for the Roosevelt family later on. Alice, understandably, would have a lot of bitterness towards her father and how he had sort of betrayed her by, giving into his grief and just forgetting that his daughter existed to a degree. He would go on to marry and have quite a few more children, uh, and really live an extraordinary life. But this was a moment in his life, this one day, that absolutely tortured him. History is out there, my friends.